And thanks, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Diversity in Aquatics. It's been a while, but we're going to bring it back for Water Safety Month in New Zealand. That's the month of November, and that's when it's getting warmer and people are going back to the water. So a good time to start thinking about things like this again. And this time, really pleased, we've got Rob Brander here, who is a researcher for rip currents. And in this episode, we're going to talk about all things rip. So first we'll go around, do a little around the room and do some quick introductions and then go from there. So Rob, can we start with you?
Yeah, so my name is Rob Brander. I'm a professor at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, and I'm based in the School of Biological Earth and Environmental Sciences. But my training and background is as a coastal scientist, a coastal geomorphologist, and my initial training and interest was in studying processes on beaches, specifically rip currents. But over time, I became more interested in studying rip currents as a hazard to people. So I now sort of call myself a beach safety researcher. And last year, we started the beach safety research group at UNSW.
Cool, thanks for that. And we've also got some individuals here from Surf Life Saving, some lifers from Surf Life Saving. So maybe start with you, Chris.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Emmett. I'm the National Club and Volunteer Development Manager. I've been a surf lifeguard since I was 14 years old. I won't tell you how old I am now, but it's been a long while, and just, yeah, really looking forward to having a good discussion today.
Cool. And Andy?
Yeah, g'day, I'm Andy King. I'm the National Lifesaving Manager for Surf Life Saving New Zealand. Yeah, like Chris, been involved for a very long time. Yeah, my role is really standards and in looking after all of our clubs, our 75 clubs, 90 plus patrolling areas around New Zealand.
Awesome. All right. So what we'll do first is actually turn it over to you, Rob. Now, I found you from the recent movie that was out in the States, Rip Current Rescue.
Right.
And you were featured in that quite a bit. So I got a look at that online and was, wow, there's somebody actually researching rips. So, yeah. And that's when I reached out to you. So maybe give us a little bit of an idea of your research and what you've been doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's actually quite a few of us studying rip currents. And certainly I can't take all the credit for that. There's a lot of excellent scientists out there. But I started studying rip currents for my PhD at Sydney University back in 1993 is when I started. And it's kind of interesting because I was a coastal scientist. I came from Canada. I've been studying coastal geomorphology. We've been doing field experiments in the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean on how sandbars behaved. But I'd never seen a rip current. And then when I went backpacking after my degree, I went straight to Sydney, Australia. And an Australian friend took me to a beach in Sydney, and he said, "Oh, look at that rip." And I said, "Oh, great. I've always wanted to see a rip. Where is it?" And he's pointing at this rip current, and I couldn't see it. And I said, "Well, where is it?" I just couldn't see it. And I thought, well, hang on. How can you study something out of a book, and then you can't see it in front of you? But that got me interested in rip currents. And I found out that not many, they're very dangerous. They're the main cause of drownings in Australia and in most surf beaches in the world. But no one had really studied them and measured them. So that was my PhD was about that, was measuring rip currents. And we did some amazing field experiments. It was difficult. It's difficult to put instruments in a very strong flowing current. But we did it. And then I kept measuring rip currents for about, almost 10 years. But over time, I also became a surf life saver in Sydney. And so it became pretty obvious to me that everyone was getting in trouble in rips. And I was surprised that for the most part, they were Australians. And I thought, geez, if there's a country that knows about rip currents, it must be Australia. But these people had no idea. And that sort of spurred, and then it's a bit of a longer story, but when I was living in New Zealand for 2 years in the late 90s, we visited Hot Water Beach in the Coromandel. And we witnessed, I was involved in a rip current drowning. This 60-year-old German tourist drowned in this rip on a beautiful, calm day, and we were involved getting him to the beach. And I just thought, how did this happen? If he'd known a little bit about what to do if you were caught in a rip, he wouldn't have drowned. And that spurred me on. And when I went back to Australia, I started this community program called the Science of the Surf, which is basically giving talks about beach safety to the community and schools. eventually, that's where my interest, I became passionate about that. And I started incorporating that into my research. So now, instead of measuring rip currents, I sort of do surveys and studies on what people understand about rip currents, their ability to spot rip currents, how effective existing education campaigns are, and how we can make them better. And that really, I think, ties in well with what Surf Life Saving does, because to make headway in reducing drowning, often you have to take an obvious situation, but provide evidence for it. So that's what we do as beach safety researchers. We provide this evidence base that Surf Life Saving and other organizations can approach governments and say, well, here's the science and here's the statistics behind it. We've got a problem.
That's awesome.
And so I guess the research we've been doing, for example, we're just about to publish a study. We surveyed people going to unpatrolled beaches. Why did they choose that beach? It's obvious. And it became, the main result was because it was convenient to where they were staying, their holiday accommodation. And it was because it was quiet. They wanted to get away from people. Well, that's obvious, but we have the statistics to say, well, we can't just tell people to always swim between the flags, because not everyone, they know they should, but they're not doing it. So how do we tackle beach safety on unpatrolled beaches beyond the swim between the flags message? And another study we're just about to publish is we've done a survey of the Southern Asian multicultural community around Sydney about their beach going behavior. So it's all about people, really, in relation to the hazard.
No, that's really good. It's another conversation we'll probably have in another episode with the importance of research in water safety and what it brings to the game. But just mention quickly, we're fellow Canadians because the Blue Jay hat's in the back, so I'll draw attention to that really quick. But open it up to the New Zealanders from a New Zealand context with the kind of research that you're just hearing. If you have anything to add or anything that's going on here, which is mirroring that.
Yeah, back in the early days, I remember Hotwater Beach. It's interesting you talk about Hotwater Beach here, Rob. So back in the early 90s, I worked for Surf Life Saving for a couple of years as the Bay of Plenty manager, and it was when Hotwater Beach was just coming online and being regarded as a dangerous destination. And the reason why it was regarded as a dangerous destination is because of the permanent rip features that Hotwater Beach possesses around the Hot Rock area and more at the southern end of the beach as well. So it's been really interesting to see their journey, and 100% agree. It comes back to, they're permanent rips, permanent fixtures, but it comes back to people and the heuristics around how people react in around rips and the decision making they make. So, and there's been several drownings at that location over the past 2 decades. And really the only thing that actually really works there is active life-saving services. So signage, you put signage in. We've tried all sorts of things through the signage journey around skull and crossbones, and we've taped off areas and stuff like that. But the only thing that really works is active life-saving services. So, probably one of New Zealand's most notorious spots for rips, and when you feed a whole lot of bus loads of tourists in there every day, it becomes a real hazard. So it's kind of, and that would be the fixed rip scenario. But then you have all these other areas across the country where rips are not so fixed. So it's quite a challenging space for us to look at.
Great. Andy, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. I think just to add to that, so certainly from my journey, I'm a little bit younger than Chris. When it was New Zealand, in terms of the west coast of particularly Auckland, in terms of dangerous beaches, has always been the obviously the world famous Piha, Muriwai, Kari, Bethel's Beach sort of scenarios, but we changed. Surf Lifesaving went on a pretty big journey through coastal risk assessments, led basically by sort of Surf Lifesaving Australia's work and Andy Short work around classifying beaches. Sort of took off in around the early 2000s, and then, or probably earlier than that. but it changed their way, as particularly hot water beach as the example, that actually risk is created by people. So hot water beach became New Zealand's most dangerous beach, not because of the wave size, but because of the constant people there, 365 days of the year. So in terms of risk hazard rating, rather than just going, that beach has got massive big surf, so therefore it's dangerous, it was more about sort of people. And then, so in terms of water currents and rip currents, it changed, I think, the way from an administration point of view around surf lifesaving, how we started to resource our patrols. I think, yeah, as Chris alluded to, yeah, constant supervision and surveillance. Now, that might not be red and yellow flags. We've started to change a little of the way we're doing things now in surf, led a lot by Chris, really, in that Bay of Plenty area of observational patrols, because sometimes signage, red and yellow flags, trying to get all those messages across is actually sometimes very, very difficult. So actually changing the way traditional lifeguarding services have operated is sometimes a great solution.
Yeah, I'm glad both you guys said some really important stuff there. And I've always admired how New Zealand approaches problems when it comes to water safety. I'm not boosting your egos, but you guys always seem a bit open to change, right? And open to trying new things. But Chris, what you said about signs not working, you tried the skull and crossbones, all that sort of stuff, you're absolutely right. And I actually, in my surf talks that I give, I show pictures of the signs they had up at Hot Water Beach in different languages, and just useless. And ultimately, it does come down to having lifeguards on the beach. And what Andy said is, we have to move beyond how we lifeguard beaches, and not just have them stay in one place. It could be surveillance or whatever. But just to show you Hot Water Beach, can I just share my screen quickly? I've got a.
I believe you should be able to if you give it a try.
Let me try. I've got a picture up. Let's try this. Can you guys see that picture?
Yeah.
So this is Hot Water Beach. I've got a page called Rip of the Month on my Science of the Surf website, where I put a picture of rips every month. And the lifeguards at Hot Water Beach sent me this, and this is the classic spot. This is where everyone's digging holes, because at Hot Water Beach you get hot springs bubble up. There's this rock here. There's a rip going straight out there. Chris talked about permanent rips. There's one going out there. There's one here. I mean, you couldn't have a better recipe for disaster to have a major tourist destination right in front of these almost permanent rips. It's just so extremely dangerous. But I know that, when this drowning occurred, there weren't any lifeguards at that beach, but now there's a lifeguard service, and I imagine that's made a world of difference, to be honest. But unbelievable. You have to have lifeguards, but that gets back to this unpatrolled beaches problem, because it's logistically impossible to have lifeguards everywhere. And especially in a country in New Zealand, where you've got a smaller population base, but you've got a ton of tourists going to remote locations. That, to me, is our biggest challenge, because we can preach to them, and we do in Australia. Whenever there's a drowning, the message that comes out is always swim between the red and yellow flags. But we know that. Most people know that. But that's not enough to convince them to get in their car when they've got a holiday accommodation and drive 30 kilometers to the nearest patrol beach. They're not going to do that. So we have to go beyond the swim between the flags message is great. And the flag system is great, but we have to give them something more. That's my strong belief.
Yeah, I guess, and that's been the big part of development in New Zealand over the last few years, Rob. So we've looked at that model, and it works. And you're right about people driving their car. People won't even walk 400 metres now to a flagged patrol. So
that's right.
And the other thing is, the councils have made beaches, because they're the jewel in the crown for tourism in their local areas, they've made beaches across New Zealand and Australia really accessible. So they've put in car parking, they've put in showers, they've put in boardwalks, they've looked after the dunes, so it's all looking pretty. But as we know, at the end of the pretty path, there's dangerous rips. So what we've tried to do as an organisation is we've really tried to adapt our patrolling methods. So yes, the red and yellow flagged areas is our go-to method of keeping people safe. But we're now starting to implement more of a roaming patrol system from the clubs, where lifeguards will go along the beach. They'll really communicate with the public, and they'll say, "Hey, that's not a good spot to swim," or "That's a better spot over there." So that interaction with people is becoming more and more important part or tool in our toolbox moving forward. So we've recognised that. But as you say, there's still those remote coastal locations, and we're just doing our Surf Life Saving New Zealand boards actually asked us to focus a little bit outside the flags now. So we now have a coastal risk manager as well, who looks at areas outside the flags and how can we best look at keeping people safe and around those. And it might be a response service or a coastal rescue or coastal responder that sits across a few locations that can respond. So, and then the other focus part of that is, as Andy might have alluded to before, is we've now split our National Life Saving Manager into SAR, which is search and rescue, and life saving. So we're starting to develop that capability a lot more across the country.
So I guess I'm liking the theme coming through of the people, because we've got the water and we've got people, and it's a collision of the two that is what we're talking about. But just quickly, and Chris, you can correct my pronunciation of this for sure, but Peter down in Ngatiponu?
Peter Boyd down in Ngāti Porou Surf Life Saving.
Porou, right.
Yeah, on the
Very
tip of the
sorry.
East Cape. Yep.
But one of the things when we were talking with him is he was stressing his flag goes from the one end of the territory all the way to the other end of the territory. There was no specific point, and there's a real empathy for this is ours. This is our area. It's not just that point between the flags. We're responsible for everything, and that it's kind of puts it into context, I think.
Yeah, Pete's really innovative around the way he approaches things or life saving within his own ethnic community, which is he's trying to make everyone, or as many people as he can, surf lifeguards within the Ngāti Porou area, which is essentially the East Cape of around to Gisborne of New Zealand. So his main drive is to teach people life-saving skills, not just in their, not just for between the red and yellows, but in their day-to-day lives. So he's hoping that will make his community and his area a lot safer in and around the aquatic environment. So that's about educating people in one way or another. And he's done it quite well. They actually have translated quite a bit of stuff into Te Reo as well. So that works in and around his ethnic community as well, which is fantastic.
Cool. So we'll switch gears a little bit, because I think a little bit of historical context might be important here as well. And this is something that really struck me, because in working with Surf Life Saving, having to go back into the history and going, where did this organization come from? How did it get here? And something that you said earlier, Rob, struck me, because we both come from the same area in Canada, never dealt with RIPS before.
Yeah.
And my time in the Caribbean kind of solidified that, because from scuba diving and sailing, and we have when you see those swirls on top of the water and stuff, and you see that stuff happening on the water, for me, that's just not there. I'm going over here where it's calm. I'm looking to not be in those areas. And then you get to a place like New Zealand or Australia, and everybody's hanging out in those areas. And it actually is kind of a cultural disconnect, where back home we just wouldn't be there unless you were actually surfing or doing something. You wouldn't have your family close to that area. You'd have your family in the calm area. And thinking about the history of surf lifesaving, why it started, and that's something that really struck me, is that there was a rise in death toll from drowning because people were on the beach and didn't know what to do back in the day. And was it 1907 it started, if I'm correct?
In Australia, I think close to that. It was the early 1900s. Yeah. I'm not sure in New Zealand when it started, but Yeah, there's a debate who started the first surf life saving club. Was it Bondi Beach or nearby Bronte Beach in these suburbs? But really, who cares? I mean, they started a long time ago. And I think what happened was it was, daylight swimming was banned, and then some guy just said stuff that, and he went for a swim at Manly. His name was William Gucher, and then that opened the floodgates. They said, okay, you're allowed to swim during the day, and then people started drowning en masse, and that's when I think the surf life saving movement began.
Right.
Yeah, for us in New Zealand, it was around we had our 100-year centenary about 12 years ago. There's a little bit of debate which club started first, whether it was a Christchurch club or a Wellington club, Lyell Bay or New Brighton. And it was basically known as the immigrant disease. They were drowning on, they were coming over to this country and drowning en masse after seeing the water. So that's how life saving started in New Zealand back 112 years ago.
You sure it wasn't drowning due to cold water exposure?
It was more of those hardy northern hemisphere people, the Scots and coming to New Zealand, Scots and English coming to New Zealand. They didn't care about water temperature. It was probably tropical actually for them.
But it's a unique thing. I mean, the surf life saving movement in Australia and New Zealand. I don't know. I guess what other countries follow that sort of path? South Africa, the UK, a little bit, but certainly in America, I work with the United States lifeguards. That's a totally different system over there and a totally different history. But having this sort of network is pretty impressive. I mean, there's very few countries as well protected on beaches as Australia and New Zealand, really. And the other thing too is, I mean, if you think about the massive amount of people who've gone through life saving and gone through training, right, to get their bronze medallion, and they can train their kids, it becomes this generational thing. And what we find in Australia, because another issue we're interested in is something called bystander rescues, where somebody sees somebody in trouble and they go in to try and help them, and often that bystander rescuer drowns. But so many bystander rescues are successful because these people at some point in their life have done nippers or they've been a surf life saver. I mean, there's a huge amount of people in Australia who have those ocean skills, whether it's recognizing what a rip current looks like or what you should do if you see somebody in trouble, which is just maybe as simple as grabbing something on the beach that floats, whereas the average person wouldn't probably think of that.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a big part of our organisation. If I look at Surf Life Saving New Zealand at the moment, we're about 18,000 members deep. 5,500 of those are lifeguards, and then we have a 9,000 junior surf membership, approximately. And those guys are learning skills at a very, very young age, confidence in and around the water, where rips exist. And then as they get older, they start to learn the rescue skills through the Rookie Lifeguard program. So, at any one stage, we're about 18,000 members. But if I look at the past membership and people that have been members, it has a massive influence on New Zealand, who, is surrounded by coast. And Australia is very similar in the fact that most of the communities or most of the population live near the coast in Australia. So.
Yeah, and I think it's a different way. Again, it's how the organisations evolve too. Very much joining nippers and becoming a lifeguard, and was sort of the main focus of a lot of surf clubs. Was that you get your nippers in, you train them up, and they become lifeguards. Now I think we're starting to see a little bit of change. I think they're still very important, and a lot of clubs, obviously still want to keep basically bringing their next recruits through that process. But at the same time, now clubs are starting to realise that they are part of the community, and they are providing water safety services and water safety education through their junior surf and nippers programs. It's not solely just to get the next lifeguards. It's also providing a really good education base where people might not go through the whole system and become lifeguards at the end of it, but we're still teaching young kids to be water safe, which is a great thing, and I think really undervalued for what surf lifesaving clubs in New Zealand and Australia have been doing now for over 100 years. It's really, really positive. And I just say before too, around how surf we're changing our way. When you look at the Gold Coast of Australia, with all the towers placed along the beach, and I went on a lifeguard exchange with California in 2006, and it was my sort of first experience of looking at lifeguarding services in California, and the lifeguards' mentality, how they didn't trust anyone in the water. Basically, not to be too harsh, but yeah, they all their towers stationed up. We went to so many different lifeguard departments, and if anyone went over sort of waist depth water or sort of chest depth water, they were basically, lifeguards were running into the water, pulling them back into closer into shore, because they just did not trust the amount of people in the water that they could actually swim. Now that was a really wake up call for me, because in New Zealand, certainly back then when I was a lot bit younger, my mentality was, well, hold on, everyone in New Zealand should be able to swim. We're an island-based nation. Everyone should be able to swim. Now, as I've worked in surf lifesaving and been a lifeguard now for a long, long time, the fact is that not everyone can swim. So that the mentality in the past where everyone in New Zealand should be swimming, should be water confident. Well, I think as our population grows, we will see less and less of that. So our lifeguard mentality around who's actually coming to our beach and who is coming to the beaches needs to sort of adjust with the times, which I think it is. But it was a bit of a wake up call for me back then.
Why do you think, as we move forward, that less people will be able to swim? Is that a financial thing for swim lessons?
There's a lot of through. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons: social issues, access to water, but even the definition of whether or not someone can swim or not. It's basically changing. The mentality of someone being able to swim 20, 30 years ago was school pool lessons, swimming. And you actually learn to swim. But now actually the change is going, well, is someone actually water confident? Can they do enough to save themselves? Can they float? And that sort of change, I think, in the last, I would say probably 10, 15 years maybe, I don't think has actually come through yet. Will we see that being enough to keep the drowning rates down? I think only sort of time will tell.
Yeah, no, interesting point. I mean, I'm not a learn to swim expert. Obviously, just because you're able to swim doesn't mean that you're going to be able to handle yourself in an ocean situation. And floating is certainly key. But, my kids did years and years of swim lessons, and they're still not very good swimmers. I think what a waste of money. What's going on?
So it's interesting you mentioned that, because that is kind of a topic of a thing now, and it's something I hold quite deeply because I learned to swim in a very different way. And I think there's not enough respect for people learning different ways of swimming as opposed to what the classic idea of what swimming is. And I also know there's a lot of research going on now with swimming competence and the perception of competence, that a lot of people think they're better swimmers than they actually are. And some people, give me somebody who can do a slow breaststroke and keep going versus somebody who can do a fast 100-meter, depending on your situation. So it's, what is your task? What are you trying to accomplish, etc.?
That's right. And in an ocean environment, the ability to keep your head above the waves, right? And to go under waves when you need to, and to just be able to negotiate an adjusting water level. But Kevin Moran, who's retired now at the University of Auckland, he was the one that really pushed a lot of swimming competence and ability to float and stuff. And amazing character, Kevin, and did a lot of great work in that area.
Yeah, this is all really good stuff. I do want to jump back to your research, though, Rob, because having you here and something that really, reflecting on it, I'm starting to understand the beach area better, I think, because I'm starting to think of it more like a boatie and more like a scuba diver with how currents work.
Right.
And back in the day when I was doing marine parks work, I was in the Tobago Keys Marine Park, and it was constantly thought that the marine park completely flushed every day because the current was coming through and they were really strong. And we noticed that filamentous algae growing in the corners, which eutrophication. And everyone, no, that's not the cause. It's not the boats that are doing that. I'm going, no, wait a second. So we dropped some current buoys in. And literally we saw these current buoys whipping out the current and then all of a sudden stopping dead, turning around and coming back, which you would think against the current. But no, there was a countercurrent going. And you're starting to see eddies changing and moving in the area. So it wasn't conclusive, but it was definitely indicative that there's a lot more going on than people thought.
Yeah.
And that's what was reflecting in the work that you're doing with rips, because the classic diagram of the rip pulls you out to sea and then it will let you go and then you can swim back in. And you're saying, not necessarily.
Well, it's a great story about, and there's a lot of lessons in this about how science can change and science can have huge impacts on the information we give out to the public. So the very first rip current scientists back in the 40s were based in California at San Diego at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And they just happened to have a pier going offshore that generated a rip current, a very strong rip current. And they literally started by throwing oranges, right? Or little drifters in these rips. And the rips went boom, straight out, well past where the waves were breaking. So they wrote it up. And they wrote a diagram that basically showed that rips go straight and they go a long way offshore. And that was the diagram that's in every textbook, and that's what I learned from, and that's what I used to teach my students. But, we got in the habit of using this harmless purple dye for students. So you go on student field trips, you chuck in the purple dye at the beach. Oh, let's watch what the rip current does. And in most times, sometimes it would go out, but most times that dye would go in circles. So it would go out in the rip quite fast, would get to sort of where the waves are breaking, and then it would circulate back in. And I remember saying, well, it normally doesn't do that. Normally it goes off. And you do this all the time. And then Jamie McMahon is a rip current scientist based in California, Monterey. And he, really smart guy, really nice guy too. And he developed these things called GPS drifters, which are like these sort of little they look like little rockets, but they're designed to float like a person would float, and you put GPS on them, right? And he would chuck these things in rip currents. And he did it in California, and then they did it in the UK, and then they did it in France. And what they found was that about 80% of the time, the rips were circulating and not exiting, which is what the textbook said. So he published a study in 2009 that said, hey, maybe the traditional paradigm and understanding is not completely correct. And maybe instead of telling people if you get stuck in a rip, to always swim parallel to the beach to get out, because you don't want to end up way offshore, maybe you should just float, because then you're saving energy, and there's a good chance, there's an 80% chance the rip will bring you back. So that came out, and it created a bit of stink within the scientific community, within the beach safety community, and people were saying, well, our rips don't do that. Our rips don't go in circles. And Surf Life Saving Australia at the time had just developed a rip current campaign, and they said, well, let's test it out. And we ended up getting some funding from them and from the Australian government, Australian Research Council. And we did these experiments at multiple beaches where we chucked in tons of these drifters and also people with GPS on. And we said, look, you people float and see what happens. You people swim parallel, different directions, see what happens. And we did, hundreds of these simulations. And we found that in terms of rip circulation, sometimes rips do go 80% in circles. Sometimes they go 100%. Sometimes they go 20%. So rip flow itself is incredibly complex, incredibly variable. It varies from different types of rips, whether you're in the middle of the beach or whether you're next to rocks. It varies from rips next to each other. It varies in the same rip, from minute to minute, whether they go out or go around. And that was reflected in the swim escape strategy. Sometimes floating was great. You go in a circle, you end up standing up on the sandbar. Happy days. Sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes you ended up, way offshore after 10 minutes and you're not going anywhere. Swimming parallel, sometimes it worked great. You're out of the rip in a minute. Sometimes it didn't work because you're swimming against the current. But the lessons there is that, we challenged the rip current. Our understanding of rip current flow has changed. You don't see that diagram anymore. Rips will either do this or they'll go in circles. But in terms of what we've been telling people in Australia, Surf Life Saving took that on board, and they said, well, we can't we can't give people one single escape strategy in a rip current that's always going to work in every situation. So they're pushing this, if you get stuck in a rip, know your options. Try floating, right? If that you might end up back in shallow water. If that's not working, try swimming. But really, the main thing is to relax and signal for help. But it's an example of how science can change, right? That it totally changed our understanding of this research, and the drifters changed our understanding of rip current behavior, and that's influenced public rip current safety messaging.
Yeah, the other really important part there is the relaxed part, because if you're a stressed out individual, it's really hard to make any decisions. So, and if you're caught in a rip and you're getting water over your head, it's very easy to stress levels to go through the roof. So
you're absolutely right. I mean, the main message that everyone agrees on when it comes to rips is don't panic when you get caught in a rip, which is so easy to say. But everyone panics. We did, as part of this research, at the same time, we did surveys of people who've been caught in rip currents, over 1,000 people. And then we interviewed 70 people face-to-face to tell us more about their experience. And it's embarrassing, but, almost 8 years later, we're finally going through these interviews. And what's coming out is that it doesn't matter how experienced people are, when they get stuck in a rip and it's beyond their control, they completely panic and everything goes out their window. And one theme that's coming out from these people's interviews, they go into this brain fog where they don't know what to do. Their fear is overriding everything. So from a psychological perspective, probably the main thing we can do to tell people if they get stuck in a rip is to try and relax. But how you overcome that panic response, I don't know how you do that. And I don't even know if it's possible. So that's a big deal, is people panic no matter what you tell them. They know what they should do, but they don't do it.
Yeah, I think it comes down to experience in the water. And the more we can get people through the NIPPERS programs into, beach education, water skills for life, and the more they can, as you said, kids get swim lessons from the age of 4 or whatever, yet some of them still can't swim properly in an open water environment. I think it's about the more we can let people experience the water environment in a safe way, the better they're going to be at making decisions, which is, when it comes down to it, where tourists and migrants come into the picture is where it gets really difficult for us.
Yep.
And we go right back full circle to the conversation of hot water beach, and the only thing that really works is active life-saving services.
Yep. Well, I think just jump in really quick with that, because how to put it, the way we teach people to swim. So one thing that I believe in a lot, especially when I'm working with adults who have limited swimming ability or can't swim at all, the biggest threshold teaching that I can do is get them into deep water as soon as possible. Because if they can get it into their head that it doesn't matter whether they're in shallow or in deep water, they can float, that the body is designed to float, that gets them over a hurdle. And all of a sudden, they're much more relaxed and able to take on the other skills because they're not as worried about being in the deep water. And then the other thing is, and this is something we're going to do another episode on, but a focus on first aid and CPR training, how that's done with the stop, think, and act. And that idea, how do you react to an emergency? And training that in. So it's great to have the experience in the water, but having that knowledge of, I'm in trouble, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Hold on, stop, think about what I need to do, and then activate. And it's parallel training, essentially, as you're getting training from one thing and you're actually applying it to a different situation. But and Andy, and especially from all of you, actually, because all this information or rips haven't changed. They've been doing the same things the entire time, and people have been rescuing the entire time, and you guys have been in the water rescuing people the entire time. Do you look back now and see a sense of, hey, this is a model that we should have been using? We should have kind of known that this was happening? Or is this something that you didn't pick up as far as the eddies and the complexity of a rip?
So, certainly in my experience, not really. Like I think the way we have patrolled the beaches, the traditional beaches, haven't really changed in since I've been around. It's how we tackle the new areas, I think, which is the issues. The Tauranga area, if you know Tauranga in New Zealand, the growth east basically of Tauranga, and how, okay, so and the bits in between. So you've got traditional surf clubs, bricks and mortar, flags out in front. Okay, what about the rest of the areas? It's how we start to patrol those areas in a way which, now knowing what we do now about rips, is helping us make informed decisions around those areas which we can't build bricks and mortar at every single beach around New Zealand to create a surf club every single time. That's not the solution. So I think knowing more about rips is helping us in our mitigation strategies, and certainly obviously around signage. Where we place signage, what is danger currents or rip currents or the skull and crossbones, how people are perceiving that information to help us mitigate any risk is part of that, because people aren't stupid. If we can inform them better and get the people to understand around the floating and that rips won't kill you, then panic will kill you. It's that sort of stuff which is trying to, I think, help us keep drowning rates down. But hey, it's a uphill battle still.
It's interesting because the best way to stop people drowning in rips is to stop them getting in rips in the first place. It's almost like when we're saying what should we tell people to do when they're stuck in a rip, it's almost too late. We've failed because they got stuck in a rip. So they've started this campaign in Australia, Surf Life Saving, called the Think Line campaign. It hasn't got much traction and attention, but it's very simple, and it's basically that anytime you go to any beach, whether it's lifeguarded or not, you should just take a few minutes and stop, look around, think about beach safety, look for hazards, have some sort of plan. If there's a problem, if somebody gets in trouble, what are you going to do? Is there anyone around that can help you? But it's almost this sort of notion that we need to ingrain that into people's heads. So you don't cross the road without looking both ways. You kind of want to make this sort of cultural, I don't know what it is, cerebral message that you don't go to the beach without thinking about beach safety. Simple as that. But at the moment, I would say that a lot of people go to the beach and beach safety is far from their mind. And we're talking mostly, I think, probably tourists and new migrants, because they don't know. So somehow, I think that's I mentioned moving beyond this swim between the flags message in Australia. That to me is the next message that they need to really, really push and make it second nature. Like wearing a seatbelt, although a lot of people still don't. I don't know. But I think also what Chris said is that, having, and Andy, you guys having your lifeguards and stuff going around talking to people, that's huge. That is massive. And that's something that probably wasn't done 20, 30, 40 years ago, getting back to your point, Kurt. And I think having lifeguards being these kind of safety ambassadors, like be more proactive, is awesome. Absolutely, absolutely huge.
That's awesome. And being able to interact with your communities and understanding your communities, it becomes a community activist job almost, that you're serving your community, which is what Surf Life Saving is, if I'm correct.
Absolutely.
Yep. So thanks so much, guys, for all of this. I'm going to give you a chance if anybody else wants to chime in with anything that they want to add before we close, because I'm conscious of your time. And we've been talking. We could probably do another episode of this, I would think, have a couple of conversations. But it's great to introduce you all, definitely, for those who didn't know each other. But just give you a quick chance to jump in with any thoughts or things that you want to sum up with.
Well, I would say, if you ever go to a beach, always think about beach safety. Always spend a few minutes thinking about beach safety.
Cool.
Yeah, from an organisational perspective, it's really good to keep discussing these things and joining the dots, because the more we look at innovating into the future, and moving with the times, the more we're gonna keep people safe throughout the years. So.
Yeah, agree. There's still more to do. There's still a lot of learning, I think, for us as an organisation, both at a grassroots level and certainly at a national level to modify the way we do things. Yeah, so I think we're doing a really good job. I think our lifeguards do a great job, but yeah, we can always do better.
Nice. And I think for me, it's, well, partly my role to think about that diversity and inclusion side of things, and how do we create that engagement between communities and people like surf lifesavers and others who guard people on the ocean, to have that community connection so that they can keep each other safe and that they can communicate properly as well. And one other thing I'll mention, because we're talking a lot about what Australia is doing, what here is doing, and other places in the world. I did have a chat with some of the crew from Royal Lifesaving in the UK, RNLI, and they had a campaign called Respect the Water, I think. And we were talking about how some of these messages from all the different countries, maybe we all need to start thinking about how we make a little bit of a universal message. So we're saying the same thing, and that when people come from other places, they're getting at least a snippet of a main foundation that will trigger something, so that when we talk about the place-dependent things, because New Zealand water is different than Australian water, is different than UK water, but it really does come down to respect the water. So something to think about as we're talking about a lot of the same stuff in different places. So having these conversations, I think, is important.
But I'd hate to see the swim reaper disappear. I thought that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
I still think it's dark. I have a hard time with that one. It's like cultural difference. If I went down to the Caribbean and put a swim reaper walking down the beach, everybody would leave the beach, and then it would just all be over.
There you go.
But
problem solved.
It's a problem solved. But no, it's definitely a good campaign. No, I'll leave it there, guys. Thanks so much. Just hang around for a second. We'll do a quick debrief, but thanks very much for this, and hopefully we'll have another chat sometime.
Thanks, Kurt.
Sounds good, Kurt.
All right, guys.